Hey, it's Shane from GotRom.com, where we help you fix injuries and get flexible. And in this video, we're talking about posterior pelvic tilt, not the infamous anterior pelvic tilt, which gets a lot more attention, but there's a lot of people that have posterior pelvic tilt, and I'm going to teach you 4 keys for how to fix it. Stay tuned. So posterior pelvic tilt is when your anterior superior iliac spine rises in relation to your posterior superior iliac spine. So when this happens, because you've probably been sitting in this position, gaming, doing homework, texting, driving, all the muscles in this region get kind of short and tight and keep you frozen in this position, which does bad things for your back, and it also does bad things for your posture. And in addition to your abs and abdominal fascia and psoas getting stuck in this position, your glutes and hamstrings on the back side also pull you into this posterior pelvic tilt. So there's 4 keys to fixing this, the most important being lifestyle, and then you also need to do tissue work, aka massage, stretching to lengthen what's short, and re-education, which is strengthening muscles that are weak. So that's what we're going to get into next. So the first thing we're going to work on is your glutes and hamstrings, your posterior chain that is pulling your pelvis into a posterior pelvic tilt. So you could just stretch, which is usually the recommendation, but I find that chewing up the tissue with some self-massage makes your stretching doubly as effective, so that's what we're going to work on first. So you could use a softball, or you could use a lacrosse ball, or you could use a jackknobber, and I'm going to show you all 3 variations. So the first thing you do is you lay on your back, and you take whatever utensil, apparatus you're using, put it on the glute region, your butt, turn your hips to the side, and then roll around searching for knots and trigger points. There's a couple things that you need to do here. One is breathe and become dead weight. This is very key. A lot of people will roll around and they'll be like, yeah, it hurts a little bit, but I don't feel very much, and their face is tense and their body is tense and they're guarding. So to actually become dead weight makes it much more intense and much more effective. So usually I have people start with either a foam roller on their glute area, or a ball is a little bit more pinpoint. This is a softball, or a lacrosse ball. The more pinpoint options being jackknobber 2, you can find on Amazon, or a lacrosse ball. Medium intensity, very intense. So if you use the medium intensity version, again, it's going on the gluteal region, hips go up, turn to the side, and then rest down like this. I like to add one additional thing to make this even better. Having a foam roller that you can rest your knee on while you are working on the glutes allows you to relax even more, and then you can get into these areas even deeper. So roll around. You also can breathe and relax, become dead weight, and then pull the knee up to the sky. That's like a pin and stretch ART, active release therapy technique. But you're just looking for anything that feels junky, tight, dense in the glute region. You find it, you pin it down, and then you become dead weight. Usually for most people, the lacrosse ball or the softball is intense enough for several weeks or months, but eventually I like people to progress to a jackknobber because it gets to the deeper layers underneath the big gluteal muscles, and the deeper layers are your hip rotators, piriformis, and other muscles. So with this, you go hips up, turn to the side on the lateral hip, come down, let your full body weight rest on that, and your knee rests on the roller so that your body can relax, and then you take big breaths, sigh, and become dead weight. Now, one pro tip here is play around with different pelvic positions. That means I'm going to arch my back, anterior pelvic tilt, stick my butt out, and that feels like it intensifies it, and then I breathe and relax, become dead weight. So I'm just on this lateral hip region, anywhere from the squishy bits on your lateral hip. And and becoming dead weight on all of that. So that's the first thing. Once you've done that for 5, 10, 20 minutes or so, you need to stretch the muscles that you just softened up. It's kind of like you chew bubble gum and it stretches easier. Same thing with your muscles. So a good beginner glute stretch is just this reclined figure 4 position. So you're here, your foot could be against a wall or a bench if you wanted it to be, or you can just reach through and grab this and pull it towards you. That's option 1. Breathing, relaxing, or tensing up your muscles, holding your breath for 5 seconds, and then releasing, tensing up, holding tight, 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 and then releasing. Another option as you start to get more flexible in your glutes is to try to wrap your elbow around your foot and this elbow around this knee. It's okay if this comes up off the ground a little bit, but pay close attention that your low back is not in any kind of pain or discomfort. If this is just too much flexibility for you and you're not there, no problem. Just use your hands like this. If you're someone who's already in posterior pelvic tilt a lot, your lumbar spine is a little bit predisposed to injury. So we don't want to add all kinds of lumbar flexion on top of it, but a little bit is okay. So spend a couple minutes stretching the glutes in this position if you're a beginner with your foot against a wall. That's option 1. Option 2 for stretching your glutes is an elevated pigeon pose. This is often easier for people who aren't super flexible. This could be a bed, a bench, or anything soft. I also like to have an additional something on it so that when I get up into the pigeon pose, like so, this knee is a little bit elevated, which just makes it feel a little bit more comfortable. So you're here, your shin is along the edge of the bench, and you're very tall up over top. And then you sink your butt back as you sigh. The cue is sigh and sit back. And then lean forward an inch. Sigh and sit back. Lean forward an inch. Notice that I'm angling my belly button towards my knee, and I'm using my hands for support here. That's position 1. Position 2, you start to turn your belly button forward more. Now I'm aimed towards the middle of my shin. And again, I sigh and sit back, lean forward 1 inch. That's the basic process. You also can feel free to experiment by coming down to an elbow or twisting your belly button towards your foot. Wherever feels like you're getting the best muscular glute stretch back here. So I said that we need to release the glutes and the hamstrings, which are pulling you into posterior tilt and freezing you there. So we worked on the glutes, but now we're going to work on the hamstrings, and specifically the hamstring attachment points. The attachment point of a muscle on the hamstring is usually the densest, the junkiest, and it's the one that's most contributing to tilting it posteriorly, or in some people's cases, tilting it anteriorly, which would be your hip flexor attachment points. But if you're someone with posterior pelvic tilt, we got to talk to these hamstrings. So you can use either a lacrosse ball or a softball. I'm going to choose the softball. And you're going to get on a hard surface. The ball goes on the hamstring attachment point. And you take a very wide squat stance. And I put my hand here for support. And this hand goes over onto this knee. And then I'm pulling my hips into the ball like that. And this can be a little bit intense if you've never done this, but you gotta search around hunting for where you're feeling the most kind of restricted in your hamstring. Once you find it, stop, big breath, become dead weight, sink down into it. That's position 1. You wanna spend a couple minutes there kind of chewing that up, making the muscles softer. The other position that you can do is, instead of having the ball high up on the hamstring attachment point, you can go a little bit more mid-hamstring. So you're here, and I like to just kind of slump and round a little bit and put my hand here. And then I'm just breathing and relaxing. Maybe I'm internally and externally rotating my thigh by kind of wiggling my foot like a pendulum. Or I can kick my foot up and down
on that same hamstring spot. So basically we're trying to get the middle of the hamstrings and the high attachment points. So this is a soft tissue release for your hamstrings, which you're going to support with stretching your hamstrings, which is coming next. So now you've massaged, chewed up the muscles in your glutes and hamstrings, and you've stretched your glutes, and now you're going to stretch your hamstrings. But we're going to stretch them in a very particular way. If you're someone who's living in posterior pelvic tilt, we don't want to exaggerate your body's desire to go into this position. So we're going to lie on our back and stretch our hamstrings with something under our lumbar spine or low back. So it looks like this. You're laying on your back. You kind of arch your back and slide a rolled up towel or a yoga mat or something underneath your low back, but you still have your tailbone here touching the ground. So this has to touch the ground. So you've got a little something putting a curve in your low back. You take a rope or a band or a towel or something, hook it around your foot, and then start with this leg bent and this leg bent. This is the most beginner version. From here, you're going to kick your leg straight out at an angle that way, and then slowly pull in this direction. Now, if you're keeping a slight arch in your back because of this pad, you're probably not going to be as flexible as if the pad was not there. For example, if I take the pad away, I'm going to slide it out, and I allow my back to round, aka to posteriorly tilt, all of a sudden my hamstring flexibility is increased. But really, it's kind of a cheat. We want you to always have a slight arch in your back so that you learn what that position feels like and you're not always living with a posterior pelvic tilt. So I'm putting this back underneath my back, and it's a cue. It's something to help me feel a subtle arch in my back. And then I'm going to stretch my hamstrings from there. So when you're stretching, you can do one of two things. Take a big breath. On the exhale, release and take up the slack. To intensify it, I also could straighten this leg as well, and then it gets much more intense. I'm being very careful that I'm feeling the contact of the pad against my back, and I'm not letting my back round and smush the pad. So I'm breathing and relaxing. The other thing I can do is kind of oscillate in and out of range. So I'm pulling back, touching my end range and releasing, pulling back, touching my end range and releasing, keeping my mind's attention always on my back and not allowing it to excessively round and flatten. The next thing that you can do is to bend this knee, bend and straighten, bend and straighten for about 10 reps. When you bend, it's not that intense, but when you straighten, whoa, that gets pretty intense for most people, especially if they've got really tight hamstrings, which, if you have posterior pelvic tilt, you probably do. So bend and straighten, or pull in and out of range. Or the last technique that I like to release the hamstrings and get them more flexible is your basic PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, a big nerdy word that means essentially contract, relax. There's more to it, but that's the basics. So how do you do that? You're going to activate all these muscles here and push in that direction, and at the same time I'm going to use my hands to resist in this direction. So the net effect is no motion. Big breath, I'm pushing that way, pulling this way, holding, and then all of a sudden after 5 seconds, release and take up the slack. So that's PNF. So you can do any of these techniques, and the more you work on this over time, the more your hamstrings will relax, and the more your pelvis will become in a more neutral position. The other area that gets tight if you have posterior pelvic tilt is kind of your abdominal fascia region. If these muscles and fascia here are stuck in this position, it's going to keep you in that posterior pelvic tilt. It's going to do bad things for your back, and it's going to keep your upper body and your neck and your shoulders in a bad position, which doesn't look good, doesn't feel good, and predisposes you to a bunch of upper body injuries as well. So we have to do something to massage and lengthen this abdominal region. How the heck do we do that? One good way is with a softball or any kind of larger diameter ball. A smaller lacrosse ball or a baseball won't quite get it. So you need something a little bit bigger. So a softball is a good, cheap starting place for most people. So what you're going to do is anywhere in your stomach region, underneath the ribs and above the pelvis. This is my bony pelvis and this is my rib cage. Anywhere in here is fair game, with one important caveat, one important warning. When you're laying here and you're breathing and you're relaxing, make sure that you never feel too much of a pulsing sensation. So you're going to lay face down on this, and if you feel the blood flow kind of pulsing, it means you need to move and change positions. It's going to be the likelihood of feeling a pulsing sensation is more likely on the left-hand side because the blood flow is stronger on this side of the body. That's why your blood pressure is 120/80, not 80/80. So it's a little bit more intense on this side. So be very careful that you're not feeling a pulsing sensation. If you're doing this exercise, your eyes should be closed. You should be very relaxed, no distracting sounds, so you can have all of your attention on what you're feeling in this region. With that said, it's pretty safe if you're doing it right. So here's what you do. Take the ball, put it in your stomach region, and you're going to lay face down on the ball. You're going to pull your arm up out of the way so your rib cage kind of gets up and out of the way. And then you're just going to try to relax. I like to rest my forehead on my forearms or my thumbs, and then breathe and relax. I'm kind of hunting around until I find a band of tightness. Oh, that's it right there. And then again, I inhale and then fully exhale. This is very key. If you don't do the full exhale, it won't be that effective. But if you exhale all of your air, all of your air, and really let it sink in, it gets much more intense. And then you just keep kind of chasing the tension, looking for whatever sheet of soft tissue feels most restricted. You pin it down, and you breathe and relax. One other little subtle trick here is if you watch my back foot, as I exhale, I pull my back foot up, and that sort of tensions the fascia. It makes the sheet of my stomach fascia more taut, like you're pulling a sheet more taut. So I make it taut, and then I relax and sink in like that. You'll notice a big difference in how it feels in your own body if you have your leg down or if you have your leg up. This is usually more intense. So once you've explored this entire stomach region on both sides, you'll probably notice when you stand up that you don't feel so caveman-like. You don't feel so kyphotic and kind of rounded and hunched because you've lengthened this front line of your body. But we can make that doubly effective again by combining tissue work with the stretching. So how do you stretch your abdominal region? Well, one basic exercise from yoga is you come down to a push-up position, like you're in the bottom of a push-up, and then I'm going to squeeze my butt so that my back doesn't arch too much. I'm going to squeeze my butt and then push up until I feel a stretch here in my abdomen area. So I'm squeezing my butt, pushing up, feel the stretch, and then again, breathe and relax. I can kind of subtly and slowly lean to the left or the right to stretch my abs on one side versus the other. You don't want to not squeeze your butt and just press up because you'll just be kind of arching your back excessively. So keep a contraction here and lengthen and stretch here. The most extreme version of this, if you're an athlete or someone who's trying to be a little bit more adventurous in your movement practice, is the full back bridge. Puts a big stretch on your abdominal region. So if that's something that you include regularly in your practice, even better. So because posterior pelvic tilt is basically the exact opposite problem as anterior pelvic tilt, the solution to posterior pelvic tilt is kind of the opposite of what we tell people for anterior pelvic tilt. So here's what I mean. But usually with anterior pelvic tilt, people are stuck in this position and their hip flexors and their low back are too tight. It's too tight and too tight. But in the case of posterior pelvic tilt, they're usually too weak or too lengthened. So we actually need to strengthen the hip flexors a little bit and strengthen the low back a little bit so we are neither anteriorly tilted nor posteriorly tilted. We're perfectly neutral and balanced, which is better for your posture, less predispose you to injury. It's better all around. So how do we strengthen our hip flexors and our lumbar erectors? Here's how we do it. You're going to lay on the ground. When you lay on the ground, we're going to, again, use this pad underneath your low back, like so. My tailbone is still touching the ground. I'm not like this, where nothing's touching the ground. It's on my low back, and my tailbone is touching the ground. This is putting me in a slight anterior pelvic tilt. And from here, we're going to strengthen your hip flexors and your core. So what you do is you're going to pick one leg up off the ground, pick the other leg up off the ground, without smushing and flattening this pad here. You want to keep a slight anterior pelvic tilt, almost neutral. But for you, as a posterior pelvic tilt person, it will feel like your back is excessively arched, but it's probably closer to neutral. So you're here, and what you're going to do is, they're called heel taps. You're going to touch your heel to the ground one leg at a time and try to keep a completely stable, motionless spine. So this is not moving, and then I touch and come back up. Touch and come back up. If that's easy and you can do 10 reps on each side, then you progress to double leg. Touch and come back up. You'll notice as your legs go out, your core has to stabilize really, really firmly, and your hip flexors also have to kick on. So this is going to teach you how to have a stable core in a more neutral position. So you're touching, coming back up. The progression after that would be either one leg or two leg, but farther out. So if you watch my foot here, I'm going to go farther out, touch, come back up, farther out, touch, come back up. And all of my mind's attention is on keeping super solid right here. Touch, come back up, or double leg, touch, come back up. So you want to progress from the easiest to harder to hardest over a reasonable amount of time, a couple of weeks to a couple of months. So we've been lengthening with massage and stretching what is too short and tight, lengthening it, but now we need to finish up by strengthening what's weak or what's too long. So one thing that is too long is often your lumbar erectors. You're in this position and they're long and stretched, and we need to get them to become a little bit more normal, not excessively tight, but not rounded. So how do you strengthen these lumbar erectors, your low back muscles? A very simple version is to lay on the ground. These are called Supermans. So you take a big breath, arms forward, legs back. Take a big breath, brace your abs, and lift and come back down. Lift and come back down. You can do this for 10 reps, and then a 10-second hold at the end is a nice thing to do. So I'm lifting, I did it 10 times, and then on the 10th one, I'm holding. So this is a good way of, when in combination with strengthening the hip flexors, lengthening the glutes and hamstrings, strengthening the back, is to restore some normalcy in your pelvic position, which is going to make you feel better, make your posture better, and do good things for your life. So, give it a shot.